My name is Roel Lopez. I'm with the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute. And what I'd like to do is start out by telling you a little bit about the issue, if you will, and a little bit about our state, Texas, and some of the changes that are occurring in our state. So Texas is a large state, 171 million acres. And oftentimes we'll hear the statistic 95% of Texas is privately owned. That's very true. Another equally important statistic is 83% of Texas is a farm, a ranch, a family forest. So about 142 million acres are labeled as working lands. Again, farms and ranches and family forests. And these lands, these working lands provide multiple benefits to the 30 plus million Texans that reside in our state. And to the right here, you see this image of Texas, 30 million Texans. Almost 90% of Texans live in an urban center. About 10% of Texans live in a rural community, and about 1% of Texans steward this 142 million acres. And so that's to say that the value of private land stewardship and private landowners is really important, as you would expect. And so what's happening in our state is we're undergoing rapid land use changes that have been occurring for several decades, but that only seems to be accelerating with each decade. And it really serves to sort of threaten the future of agriculture and human health within our state. And private landowners, in my opinion, are a key component in conserving and stewarding these resources moving forward. And so some things to sort of keep in mind or be aware of is every day, by the end of today, we would have lost another farm or ranch in Texas. We lose about a section of land, a square mile of land every day. And it's due to primarily the 1,200 plus people that move to our state every day. The fact that, again, more people, greater demand on land, couple that with the majority of our landowners are over retirement age. The average landowner in Texas is about 65 to 66 years of age. And what we're seeing in our state is the largest intergenerational transfer of rural land, of working lands in the history of our state. And this is really a phenomenon that's occurring across the country, but Texas is no exception to seeing these increases in pressures and so forth. So then the question is, well, what's the impacts of these changes? You know, we estimate at A&M about a third of this land base of these working lands will be impacted in the next decade or so due to fragmentation, conversion, and so forth. So the question then is, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of not having this section of land, this farm and ranch upstream from San Antonio or Austin? And there on the screen are statistics that include loss of food production, loss of fiber production. The webinar's focus is really with water, and there are multiple benefits of water tied to land. So consider land as infrastructure, and the fact that our state is losing this basic land infrastructure impacts water quality, water quantity, ability to recharge our rivers and our streams, our aquifers. And many of our speakers later this afternoon are going to touch upon these items and give you more specific examples on the importance of farms and ranches in a water conservation framework, if you will. The notion of changes in working lands is something that we've noted at Texas A&M for the last 2 decades or so. Texas is not unique. Other states like Florida, Georgia, for example, have seen similar growth patterns. And it starts with a strong economy, resulting in an increase in population, an increase in demand for rural land, high land values, ultimately with an incentive to either subdivide or sell and either convert or fragment that land. Convert meaning move it out of ag production, and fragmentation, meaning the breakup of a larger, let's say 1,000-acre ranch into smaller segments. And so the thing that I think is important for us to keep in mind is our state is really undergoing some pretty significant demographic changes that impacts our land infrastructure. More people, more diverse perspectives, emerging stakeholders. There's also changes in the landowner base and landowner demographics. I sort of touched on some of that in terms of the aging landowner population. And lastly, competing interests. And I'm going to go through each of these and then stop and kick it over to the remainder of our speakers. So let's start with the first trend in Texas is more people. So with this graph here, we see that the projected population, which again is at about 30 million, is expected to increase nearly double in the next 30 or so years. And so if you thought, that's going to be a significant challenge, both from a water quality perspective, and just being able to manage this resource along with other natural resources derived from farms and ranches. We also see an increasing separation, if you will, between rural Texans and urban Texans, where again, the majority of Texans live in urban centers. So if we're trying to promote the notion and importance of natural resources, water resources, and so forth, that's going to be much more challenging for us to connect the dots and show the value of those things. Again, there's also changes in other demographic characteristics, like the growing Hispanic population. So more people is the first significant change. The second, obviously, I've alluded to, is an increase in demand for rural land. So these signs that we see across our driving in Texas have become more commonplace. We're seeing significant changes in land use in terms of conversion and fragmentation in and around these urban centers. So not surprising, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, they call this the Texas Triangle, and we're seeing the majority of those changes within that portion of the state. So a greater level of conversion is occurring. And this map down here kind of shows you a little bit of what that conversion looks like. That's again driven by market value. So an early predictor of conversion and or fragmentation to land is market value. So not surprising, higher values results in an incentive to subdivide and ultimately convert that. We're also seeing trends with land ownership in terms of absentee landowners out of county. This is Gillespie County, Fredericksburg, and you can kind of see here that about almost 50% of the landowners don't live in that county. So again, they live in San Antonio and Austin, other places. And so the last item with regards to land and land stewards is the fact that what's that future landowner going to look like? Their goals and objectives perhaps are going to be very different than landowners from the past. And so all of these things really result in a very changing dynamic landscape in Texas with regards to farms and ranches. The last slide here is competing interests. So we've talked about more people, greater demand on our land. We've talked about some of the changes that are occurring to Texas and our Texas landscape. And the challenge that I try to convey with this slide is when you look at the top issues, the things that really keep people up at night, things like healthcare, education, immigration, are topics that come to mind or are a concern. And so that makes it challenging to promote land stewardship when you've got other issues that are equally as important as well. And so as land conservationists, land stewards, land managers, really we need to be aware that we're really dealing in an environment with competing interests. And so being able to have a seat at the table to, again, promote the stewardship of natural resources and the stewardship of farms and ranches moving forward is extremely important. And so with that, Well, my last slide is, again, land is infrastructure. I'd like folks to kind of think about that in that way. So we think of highways and electric grid and water systems and so forth as infrastructure. Land is also infrastructure. More people is going to have a greater impact on our working lands, changes in landowner perspectives. And all of these things really are going to offer for some pretty challenging times, particularly within a water context. But ultimately, being able to communicate what are the benefits of these farms and ranches could be a way forward. And with that, I will turn it over back to the moderator. There are some websites there, particularly Texas Land Trends, if you're interested in some of the data that I presented here. So with that, I will stop and turn it over back to Joni.
Thank you, Roel. Again, that was Roel Lopez. He's the director of the Texas A&M Natural Resource Institute, and we're incredibly grateful for having him share his expertise today. And there is a plethora of information about the state of Texas on that Land Trends website. So I do encourage you to go and take a look. If you're just joining us and you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat and we will try to get to them at the end of the time. And I want to apologize for those who are here at the top of the hour. We had some technical difficulties, but we're running smoothly now. We do have 3 more panelists up next. We'll have David Cowan, the watershed manager for the North Texas Municipal Water District. David, go ahead.
Thanks, Joni. Just do a quick sound check and computer check. Are you good? Can you see? We're good. Okay, thanks very much. Well, that was certainly a sobering presentation. We are definitely seeing that growth in North Texas. Again, my name is David Cowan. I'm the watershed manager for the North Texas Municipal Water District. And I wanted to talk today about our watershed protection planning efforts, but I want to start by talking a little bit about the district and our role, and then talk about the watershed planning process statewide. So let's just dive in. Maybe. We're good? Yeah. So as the name implies, North Texas Municipal Water District, we are a water district. We're a wholesale provider of potable water to a 10-county service area, but we also serve our communities with solid waste services and wastewater services. So our mission is to provide high quality and dependable water and wastewater services in a cost-efficient manner. Now, the district supplies about 2 million people in North Texas currently. As Roel rightly pointed out, the population here is changing and growing rapidly. According to the Texas Water Development Board, the population within our service area is going to double within the next 50 years, which is our planning horizon for water. We right now have a capacity to treat just over 800 million gallons per day. Most of that is sourced from Barrow Lake. We do have some other sources coming on. We have Barrow Lake, which is a new reservoir in Fannin County. I'll talk about that in a little while. But I just want to point out that watershed protection is really, from a utilities perspective, the first step in water treatment. It can not only lower treatment costs and protect that water source, but it also serves to benefit the watershed, wildlife, habitat, and in some cases, endangered species and recreation. So a little bit about the watershed approach. It's a non-regulatory way of protecting and improving water quality. If you were to summarize it in a few bullet points, like I'm doing here, it starts out with a characterization of the watershed. Find out historically what water quality is like. What's the lay of the land? What's the population density? What's the land use, land character that Roel was describing? You take that and quantify the existing pollutant loads. What type of pollution is going into the water, and then develop estimates and load reductions required to meet those. That will align with state water quality standards. So After that, you can identify management measures that will reduce those and then monitor those water quality, those management measures to see the effectiveness on water quality. I want to point out that it's key to have stakeholders involved from the get-go. These processes take place, the planning process can take anywhere from 6 months to a year. They typically last for many years afterwards for implementation. And it's key to have stakeholder involvement from the beginning and on through implementation, as those partnerships are essential for success. Continuing with watershed planning in Texas, there are about 44 watershed protection plans in the state right now. They are primarily supported by Clean Water Act funds, 319 funds from EPA. They're through the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board and the TCEQ. Now, the TCEQ primarily manages the watershed protection plans within urban areas, while the Soil Board manages those that are in more rural areas. You get an EPA acceptance for your watershed protection plan, and that opens the door to implementation for the plan. Lavon Watershed, Lavon Lake was the first watershed that we've undertaken. Again, Bodark Lake is up and coming, and we've started a watershed protection plan on that. But I want to point out that the Lavon watershed is we're in the north, in the Upper Trinity, just northeast of Dallas. I don't know. I think there's a lot of people here from across the state, so I want to point out where we are. Okay, so a little bit about the Lavon watershed, the timeline and the process that we've gone through. It started in 2015 when EPA approved the TCEQ integrated report. Integrated report is basically a report card for surface water quality in the state. And it identified a couple of tributaries to Lavon as having elevated bacteria levels. I want to point out that the bacteria levels that they're sampling for and that are called out in the integrated report are for E. coli, and that is something that's treated as part of the standard water treatment process. So we're not necessarily talking about an impact to water quality for drinking water. As a matter of fact, E. coli is a contract recreation standard. So that occurred in 2015, and that launched in September of 2016, Texas A&M AgriLife and the district to solicit funding from the Soil Board to facilitate a watershed protection plan. In November of 2016, the Lavon Watershed Partnership formed, and that was basically a group of stakeholders from across the watershed, including city leaders, county leaders, soil and water conservation district board members, landowners are a big part of that. This watershed is still very rural, although I do want to point out that I'm not sure if you can see that this area right here to the west is the most urbanizing area, which the Metroplex is expanding. And coincidentally, those are the two watersheds where elevated bacteria levels were found. In 2017, the draft was completed. In December of 2017, the Watershed Protection Plan was accepted by EPA. So what did that look like? When it was all said and done, the Watershed Protection Plan established a 10-year planning horizon to reduce bacteria, reduce sediment and nutrient loads, and to help keep toxic and hazardous substances out of the water. Again, with the acceptance by EPA, that opened the door for grant funding opportunities, and I want to go through some of those right now. In 2018, the Soil and Water Conservation Board granted the Collin County Soil and Water Conservation District funding for a district full-time conservation technician. This is a person who is really boots on the ground. So where Roel was talking about the changing demographics and subdividing of our lands, This is a person that works for the Soil and Water Conservation District in Collin County who can meet with these landowners, both historical landowners and new landowners, talk about the programs that they have, assess their land, develop water quality management plans specific to their needs, and then help them find funding to perhaps implement management practices specific to their land. That position to date has developed almost 3,000 acres that are under water quality management plans, and that is growing. So another grant that we received in 2018, also from the Soil Board, was directed towards the district, and it supported continued implementation of the plan. I used to have a professor that said, if you're not monitoring, you're not managing. And so part of what that grant covers is our monitoring. It covers funding for 14 sites in the Lavon watershed. I do also want to point out that the district is a Clean Rivers program partner with the Trinity River Authority, and we sample in total 29 sites through our service area. Outreach and education is another part of that continuation of the grant from the Soil Board. We host stakeholder meetings and workshops, such as new landowner workshops, Lone Star Healthy Stream workshops, workshops for urban stream restoration. So we're trying to reach out to both the new landowners, the urbanizing areas, as well as the historically rural areas with education pieces. We were able to purchase a stream hydrology trailer. If you have not seen one of these, AgriLife has several of them. We got one. Unfortunately, COVID hit about 6 months after we got it. We were able to take it out several times. We're starting to see get some requests for it again. It's about a 20-foot, 18-foot trailer, and it demonstrates stream hydrology and erosion. And so it's really cool to take out to schools, but honestly, adults get a kick out of it too. And it's a great learning tool. We've also produced videos and fact sheets and signage to distribute about watershed and watershed protection in the area. So we also received, this is in 2019, a TCEQ grant. Remember I mentioned that TCEQ manages the grants for the urban areas. And so we received a grant that promotes green stormwater practices. Much of the watershed is starting to urbanize, and that's only going to continue. So as that growth occurs and we see more impervious cover, it increases flash flooding and erosion in the creeks. One way to combat that is through low impact development or green stormwater infrastructure. So we're going to establish some workshops and some roundtable meetings with some local city officials to start to see how we can help them develop resources, perhaps model ordinances that will encourage low impact development and green stormwater practices as the area grows. We have on the books also a design and construction project. We have 4 sites that are going to be developed in the McKinney and Wiley areas. And these are going to be demonstration sites to advertise how green stormwater management can be done effectively. So this was a bit of a surprise, a pleasant surprise. In 2020, the 2018 Farm Bill was passed by legislatures, by the US Congress in 2018. The funding didn't trickle down until a little after that. But because the Watershed Protection Plan in Lavon was in place, and because we had an active group of stakeholders, and there were some other factors involved too, but the state NRCS selected the watershed as a priority watershed under one of their programs, the National Water Quality Initiative. And what that equated to, the Farm Bill was specifically to take NRCS funding sources for the purpose of protecting source water, drinking water protection. And so what that amounted to was about $1 million in incentives was made available to producers in Lavon, agriculture folks in Lavon. And that again provided technical assistance and financial assistance towards developing conservation plans, and then seeking out funding for matching to implement those plans. I think the last project that I wanted to go over from the Lavon watershed was, and I don't want to steal Mac's thunder here, but we did have an opportunity for a public-private partnership with Bonneville Environmental Foundation. So we partnered with Texas A&M Forest Service to solicit a grant. And what ended up happening was we selected a few sites. We found a site along Wilson Creek that was in need of some riparian vegetation. It's an abandoned or an old golf course. It's no longer in use. And together, BEF and Coors Seltzer awarded us and the many, many partners that were involved $51,000 to plant vegetation along the creek. It was a great event. We had over 100 volunteers show up on planting day. It was Texas Arbor Day, good PR move. Over 1,600 trees were planted, and the city of McKinney is currently maintaining those, making sure that they have water for the first year or two until they get established. Partners included Texas A&M Forest Service, the City of McKinney, Parks Foundation, and then I saw several Black Land Prairie Master naturalists involved and master gardeners on this webinar. So a big shout out to them, the Herd Museum, and then the district as well. So lastly, I've mentioned Boat Ark a couple of times. Boat Ark Lake is a new reservoir. It's not completed quite yet. It's in the Red River Basin along the Oklahoma border. It's about 208,000 acre watershed, which is a little less than half of what Lavon is. So it's a little smaller, but we are starting a watershed protection planning process on it. Back in June of 2021, we held a kickoff meeting and have held a series of meetings over the last few months. As a matter of fact, the steering committee has the draft plan in hand right now. And once final reviews are complete, we hope to pass that along to EPA for acceptance and begin implementation in 2022. That was a whole lot of information really quick, trying to catch us up on time here. I would say that if I wanted you to take any takeaways, few key takeaways are that watershed protection plans provide a non-regulatory approach to protecting water quality as opposed to, say, a total maximum daily load, which has regulatory implications. Stakeholders and partnerships are essential from the beginning of the planning process until implementation is established and well into implementation. You have to have stakeholders and partnerships involved for successful watershed protection plans. Once a watershed protection plan is implemented, funding is available from, as we pointed out, Clean Water Act 319 funds, but also from public and private partners as well. And then watershed protection planning is going to be critical. Again, Roel's talk about how Texas and the population is changing is key. And as those land changes and populations change, we need to be very mindful of how we protect that water source. I don't think we're taking questions now. I had that slide here, so I'll turn it back over to Joni now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. What an excellent overview of planning and some of the initiatives that are underway right now, and a great segue into our next speaker, who is Mac Martin. He's the Partnership Coordinator and Forest Legacy Coordinator for Texas A&M Forest Service. So Mac's going to give us a little bit deeper view into some of the project work that's being done. Mac, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Joni. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sound great.
Okay, great. In the spirit of technical difficulties, my webcam has decided it doesn't want to work either, I guess, but it was my mic as well, so I wanted to make sure that, but as long as you guys can hear and see me, we'll keep moving forward. Like Joni said, I'm Mac Martin. I'm the partnership coordinator for the Texas A&M Forest Service's Urban and Community Forestry Department. And today I'm going to be telling you about the role of forests and trees in urban watershed management. Okay, so this is a diagram of the forest and water cycle in a traditional forest setting. It still operates as the water cycle we all learned growing up with evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, with the obvious addition of this forest here in the middle. So we'll run through each of these terms quickly, starting with interception. Interception is exactly what it sounds like. It's when the tree's canopy or its leaves and branches gets in the way or intercepts rainfall from reaching the ground. And the tree will hold on to a portion of this rainfall for its own use, never allowing it to reach the ground and become part of surface runoff. And when the tree is done with the water, it'll just evapotranspirate back into the clouds. Evapotranspiration is just a process of evaporation, not from a water body source. In this case, it'll evapotranspirate out of the tree's leaves. And a byproduct of interception is that a portion of the rainfall that was not intercepted into the tree is greatly slowed down on its way to the ground. And when the rain is slowed down, it allows for a greater amount of infiltration. And this is when the rainfall seeps into the ground. Forest floors are very conducive to infiltration. They have interconnected root systems, organic matter, and fungal mycorrhizae to help make forest floors extremely porous. And getting that rainfall to infiltrate is very important because the soil is the workhorse of the natural water cleaning process. And that's because once that water infiltrates into the ground, it doesn't move straight down, but rather it'll move both downward and horizontally along its permeable layers. And from here, one of three things can happen. The first is a portion of the water will remain as soil water storage. And this is generally reserved for your understory species to use. The next is that the water may percolate down into your groundwater table, facilitating your groundwater recharge. And lastly, the water will become part of a subsurface or base flow. And this is a delayed groundwater flow that provides water to rivers and streams to keep water flowing in the drier months. Subsurface flow is critical because it's where the majority of the water purification process takes place. As that water moves through the ground, the rock and soil underneath act as a natural filter. Pollutants are filtered, attached to soil particles, or eaten by microbes as it passes through the soil, which only allows really clean water to enter into your water body. And so with a portion of the rainfall being intercepted and the high rate of infiltration, forest land uses allow for the smallest amount of surface runoff to erode soils and bring pollutants into the water body, which is why forested watersheds provide the cleanest water of any land use. And the last slide is about water in a natural forest setting. As you might guess, water moves a little differently in urban environments. Urban environments will all have similar general characteristics. As that urbanization increases, you'll see a decrease in your tree canopy, your vegetative ground cover. So these are like your grass layers and your permeable topsoil. Those are all removed for impervious surfaces. Those are your roofs, asphalt, concrete, severely compacted soils, basically any surface that water cannot infiltrate into. And as land loses its ability to absorb rainfall, we see a significant increase in surface runoff. And it's important to note that that surface water quality will be much lower and your flood risk will be much higher in these areas. And then trees will help to slow down runoff and allow for more infiltration, decreasing your frequency and severity of flooding while also facilitating the natural filtration of water. So now that you have a little more understanding of why we want to plant and maintain trees in our watersheds, I can tell you how the Texas A&M Forest Service and our partners are working to accomplish these goals. These are some of the current projects that are using trees to help protect our water resources in urban and developing areas. One way is implementing the use of trees in watershed protection plans. David went into good detail about the role and function of watershed protection plans in his presentation, but one thing to consider is including planting trees and reinforcing riparian buffers as strategies for water quality and flood mitigation. Currently in the state of Texas, there are 3 watershed protection plans, including tree planting as a water quality improvement strategy. That's Spring Creek and Cypress Creek, both in Houston, and Hickory in Denton. We also have the Texas Partnership for Forest and Drinking Water, which was established in 2015. And this is an initiative that works to increase understanding and communication between the forest and drinking water sectors. It's part of a larger regional collaborative called the Southeastern Partnership for Forest and Water. And the state of Texas is really at the forefront of this partnership, working with municipalities, NGOs, and private forest landowners to identify and protect forest areas that are critical to surface drinking water resources. And then lastly, we have our best management practices, low impact development, and increasing our forest canopy to target benefits has positive impacts to water quality, flood mitigation, and several other ecosystem services as well. Before I move on, I did want to point out that the 2 pictures I included on this slide both share the word partnership. And that's because no one organization is going to be able to accomplish these large scale goals on their own. Collaboration and networking is critical in these projects. And even more than that, maybe seeking out non-traditional partners. You might be surprised to find out how much your goals actually overlap. And a great example of what that culmination of everything I just talked about can look like is the Wilson Creek Riparian Restoration Project, which was a tree planting event in McKinney completed this past November. A little bit of background: in the fall of 2020, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, as part of their Change the Course campaign, partnered with Molson Coors to provide funding for projects to help restore critical waterways as a promotion for Coors' new hard seltzer. And in Texas, they wanted projects to help protect and restore the Upper Trinity River. So I started looking for written watershed protection plans in that area. And then for my interest and for the Texas Forest and Drinking Water Partnership's interest, started looking at watershed protection plans that also impact drinking water. I called one of my partners at TCEQ, and she told me a lot of attention and take a hard look at the Lavon Lake Watershed Protection Plan, and that Dave Cowan was the watershed manager for that. Well, David Cowan and I had actually met a year earlier and networked together at a workshop. So that became my first call, a much easier thing to do. And I called David, who had already been approached by BEF about a project. And a couple meetings later, we were already up and rolling. Using direction from the Lavon Lake Watershed Protection Plan, we ended up choosing to plant along the impaired Wilson Creek, a tributary to Lavon Lake. And David and I began reaching out to local partners to get them on board. And together, our partnership was awarded $51,000 from the Change the Course grant to plan and execute a large-scale tree planting for watershed health and source water protection. And we used that funding to put on a zero waste tree planting event in the riparian area of the McKinney Greens. McKinney Greens is a reclaimed golf course owned by the city of McKinney and adjacent to Wilson Creek. And this is a site that is in the regulatory floodway, and due to excess urban stormwater runoff, experiences heavy stream bank erosion, polluted runoff, and sediment deposition, all funneling into Wilson Creek, which then funnels into Lavon Lake. And to give you an idea of the drainage challenges of this site, that top picture is the drone footage of our planting after about 2 inches of rain over a 36-hour window. And the bottom picture is the still very saturated site 3 days later at a planting event. Somehow we still got over 150 volunteers out there to plant 1,600 native trees, and they were comprised of 11 different riparian species, meaning that we put the most appropriate and efficient tree species out there to accomplish our water quality and flood mitigation goals. And the trees ranged in size from seedlings just over a year old all the way up to 15 gallons. Lastly, this event, like David mentioned, did take place in celebration of Texas Arbor Day and was featured on my agency's annual Texas Arbor Day live stream. And one of the biggest requirements was to report volumetric environmental water benefits resulting from completion of this project. Basically, how much water are we actually saving annually by putting these trees in the ground? And as part of my position, I regularly use the iTree suite of tools, which is our suite of 6 online tools created by the United States Forest Service and their partners that accurately simulate all the site-specific benefits of trees. They quantify data into residential energy savings, carbon capture, stormwater reduction, water quality, and a lot more. And for this project, I used iTree Design, Eco, and Hydro to calculate our benefits. And this graph here shows our total reduction of runoff in gallons across all trees planted, and it is also modeled to show the benefits after 1, 5, 10, and 20 years. It accounts for expected mortality of the trees under normal urban conditions over that time frame as well. And as you can see, after 1 year, the young trees do provide some benefit, but as they grow is really when you start to see your stronger results. And after 20 years, they will have reduced over 4 million gallons of surface runoff entering Wilson Creek. And it's important to point out that we only modeled to 20 years, but truly most of these trees that we planted will have just begun to enter maturity at that point after 20 years. So our return on investment will probably continue to compound in perpetuity over each one of those living trees between 70 and 120 year lifespan. And like I said earlier, with iTree, we can calculate more than just the water benefits. So these same trees that were specifically planted to protect and improve water resources around Wilson Creek and Lavon Lake will also sequester almost 1.1 million pounds of carbon and remove over 4,000 pounds of air pollution over the next 20 years as well. And one of the best things about the Wilson Creek project is that by its design, it's completely replicable and scalable given the funding, partner goals, and size of the planting area. An example of scaling up the project would be our Cypress Creek riparian restoration in the Houston area, where actually this coming Saturday, in celebration of Houston's Arbor Day, we're going to plant over 6,000 trees in the riparian area of the impaired Cypress Creek. One of the biggest factors I'd say in the growth of the Cypress Creek versus the Wilson Creek projects has to be the active use of the Cypress Creek's Watershed Protection Plan. If you remember, that was one of the plans in the state that lists increasing tree canopy and reinforcing vegetative riparian buffers as a water quality improvement strategy. And the Texas A&M Forest Service actually provided input on this plan since its first meeting back in 2019, and eventually provided iTree hydro data on the benefits of increasing forest canopy in this watershed. Especially from a funding perspective, having those horizontal and vertical partnerships and buy-in from your state and local governments, your NGOs, your private citizens, to have all those groups come together and not just say that they were in favor of, but actually advocate for nature-based solutions like a tree planting in an official document was critical to securing multiple funding sources for this project. And it was helped to secure other partners because 6 of our partnering organizations for the planting were already part of the watershed protection plan's drafting process. And these are some of the other benefits that we can target with increasing your urban forest cover. We talked lengthily about what trees provide for stormwater and water quality, but they also save residents money on their energy bills, sequester carbon, alleviate urban heat island effects, and clean up air pollution. Studies have also shown that trees provide positive impacts to your physical and mental health and can even lower healthcare costs. And it's important to remember that, no matter which benefit we decide to target in a planting, you still receive pretty much everything you see on this slide just by putting that tree in the ground and helping it reach to maturity. So it's, when increasing your urban forest canopy, you don't want to just plant trees for the sake of planting trees. It's about planting the right tree species in the right place with the right amount of growing space to maximize those ecosystem benefits. So in conclusion, forested watersheds provide the cleanest water of any land use. Trees provide a number of benefits to urban watersheds, including positive impacts to your water quality and flood mitigation. Please consider increasing your urban forest canopy and planting trees as a water quality strategy in your local watershed protection plans and any other projects. And finally, maybe most important, creating and maintaining successful partnerships are critical to successful projects now and in the future. So that was a lot of information to throw at y'all, but that is, I know we'll take the questions at the end.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mac. That was incredibly informative. And we are running up to the time that we're going to have at 1 o'clock. Kathy, Jack will be our last speaker. But for those of you who are listening in, if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We'll work to get written answers to you if we're not able to get to those verbally during the time that we have. So please do, if you have questions or if you want more resources, more links, connections, put those in the Q&A and we'll make sure that those are addressed. And one thing I wanted to point out that each of the speakers has touched on so far is the collaborative nature of the projects that they're working on, the partnerships that are necessary as Texas is growing and as we're putting nature-based solutions into effect all over the state. And the next speaker is a great example of that, of really digging down even deeper into the partnerships and what's going on in urban areas across Texas. So next up, we have Kathy Jack. She is the director of the Nature Conservancy's Dallas Healthy Cities program. Kathy?
Thank you, Joni. Thanks so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen and see if we can do this quickly and correctly. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay,
Kathy.
there we go. Oops. And of course, we're not on the, sorry, you got a preview. Okay, I'll try to be quick, although I'm not sure I can speak as quickly as Mac just did. And so I think we'll have to fast forward over some of the slides, but it's such an honor. Thank you to the North Texas Municipal Water District and Texan by Nature. It's an honor to be with all of you and this great group of speakers. We are taking this sort of like the last speaker, Mac, into the urban context. And like Roel pointed out, land is infrastructure is the theme of this study. So I'm going to share some highlights of a very collaborative study that the Nature Conservancy in Texas has just completed with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension that really focuses on the value of natural solutions in the urban context from a flood management perspective. This is very collaborative. I want to thank not only our funder, Lyda Hill Philanthropies, but I think Fuad, Dr. Jabber and his team, our co-author, he's on the call today. And if there's technical questions, he's the one to answer those in the chat. And to call out our partners at the City of Dallas. We couldn't have done this without them. And the Trust for Public Land. So this, again, this has been covered. We know the Dallas-Fort Worth area is the fastest growing metropolitan area in the United States. And with that, we are rapidly losing natural cover and green spaces to impervious surfaces, which raises up all kinds of challenges for nature, for biodiversity, for human health, for stormwater management. This is going to be exacerbated by climate change. Texas is expected to see increases both in the magnitude and the frequency of heavy precipitation with climate change. And our Texas state climatologist predicts that by 2036, flooding in our cities is estimated to become up to 50% more frequent. This is a concern. This map is the city of Dallas. These challenges are even more exacerbated in our older cities where we are outpacing and outgrowing our stormwater drainage network, which was designed for previous conditions. This map highlights in Dallas, those green areas, all of the stormwater network there was designed for, at most meeting 5-year standards. Right now, the cost to bring all these red areas up to meet today's standards, to meet the 100-year return period storm, is the cost, the price tag is about 2.1 billion. And this is not unique to Dallas. Our budget to bring that's available, funds from the last drainage bond, is far short of that. So we have a need to meet. We, the Nature Conservancy, and our partners are looking at the role of natural-based solutions, green stormwater infrastructure, also called low-impact development. We know that cities around the world, as this was highlighted by David and by Mac, are including nature-based solutions in the form of low-impact development and green stormwater infrastructure, where we use engineering to imitate natural hydrological processes. Traditionally, most cities have done this for water quality improvements. However, more and more people are looking to quantify and understand the flood mitigation benefits. Our partners at the city have a long history. They've been working since at least 2007 to bring best policy practices into their design standards, including using the regional design standards, ISWIM. Most recently, they've approved a comprehensive environmental and climate action plan that features LID and GSI all throughout the plan. And particularly, it calls out this study that we worked on together, which is looking at this research question: where within the city of Dallas can green stormwater infrastructure most effectively enhance urban flood management, considering capacity, cost, and the future impacts of climate change? So Dr. Jabber's team used hydrologic modeling and spatial analysis to help answer this question. This is where it gets detailed, so I'm going to be really fast and just say they built SWIM models everywhere they could get complete stormwater drainage network. And the point of this was to really model in 3 different return period storms, nuisance flooding, two-year design storms, 10-year design storms, and 100-year design storms, in current and climate change forecasted conditions for 2045. They ran these models to identify those places where the stormwater network system is undersized and likely to cause flooding. That's what these dots are. We're calling them system hotspots. Then they looked upstream from the system hotspots and identified the contributing sub-watershed, and we call these challenge sub-watersheds. Those were also where we looked to identify opportunities. This is what this looks like for the 3 current condition storms pieced together for the city. You can see we identified a range of severity hotspots. This is what that looks like with the climate change scenarios. And I know I'm going fast. Here's the same information with a graph. Besides identifying areas of concern, we saw no surprise that with more precipitation, including with climate change, you see more system hotspots, more severe system hotspots, and additional areas of contributing subwatersheds. What was also important to note was that the forecasted conditions showed that in 2045, the 10-year design storm looks like today's 100-year design storm. That's a concern. Next, and this is zoomed in, we did a spatial analysis with GIS. And the team looked at where on the ground do we have places to put 3 types of green infrastructure systems that were selected for this study based on their cost per volume capacity. We looked at bioretention areas, rain gardens, and rainwater harvesting. And not only did we find under the different current design storms potential sites to implement these, we then applied standard designs to quantify the capacity of stormwater capture that could be made available and put dollar figures to that to see cost. This is what it looked like. This is a lot of information, but just to give you a snapshot, the punchline here is we identified substantial potential opportunities to deploy GSI, and the bioretention areas, particularly in the parking lots, have the most available siting opportunities, represent the biggest bang for the buck. This slide is too much to read. Don't worry about it. The point is that they went into detail looking at capacity for the different current condition storms. If we put GSI everywhere, we could reasonably place it. And we compared it for the 100-year design storm to gray infrastructure. And what we found is that if we really comprehensively integrate GSI throughout these challenged watersheds, we could reduce the modeled overflows from 17 to 31%. compared to no GSI. We also found that GSI was 77%, and this included maintenance costs, less costly than just upgrading gray infrastructure alone to meet those modeled overflows. And the best solution, both in terms of capacity and cost, was an integration of both the green and the gray. The team also looked at before and after, put in all those savings, that capacity data into the model to look at what happened to these challenged subwatersheds at a citywide neighborhood scale. The punchline is we have a reduction overall in hotspots and challenged areas. And equally as important, you see a shifting from severe overflows to less severe overflows. We also have sort of this is like what Mac pointed out, you have a delay in the release of the water into the system, which is very important. So the takeaways are really that when you look at green stormwater infrastructure from the site to the scale, this is really a meaningful solution to consider when you're designing stormwater management on site. When you comprehensively integrate GSI into the fabric of the city, we can have meaningful and cost-effective flood management benefits, particularly when we combine these systems with gray solutions. And we have all of the co-benefits. We have not just the urban flood management, we have improved water quality, reduced urban heat island impacts, improved ecological function, and biodiversity. So I think that's all. I don't know where I am with time, but thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kathy. That was incredibly informative as well. Again, for those of you who are still with us, if you would, any questions that you have, put them in Q&A while we're wrapping up, and we will follow up afterwards to ensure that your questions are answered. There was a lot of incredible data, incredible project information shared today. We'll make sure that you have the resource links and that your questions are answered. But as we are wrapping up today, a couple of key things were prevalent throughout all of the presentations: the need for partnership and collaboration, the need for understanding our watershed plans and the tools that are available, and the need for broad encompassing conservation as our population is growing. I think the US Census Bureau showed that from July of 2020 to 2021, we had about 850 people coming to Texas every single day. So now is absolutely the time to learn from one another and to build on the tools, the projects, the learnings that have been presented here today. So again, please go ahead and submit your questions. You can put those in the Q&A or to any of the websites or the links that have been shared as well. And I just want to thank you all for taking interest in today's webinar. Look for the announcement for the third in the series coming out in the coming weeks. And we're excited to have you joining all of us in partnership to conserve water in Texas and take care of all of our natural resources. Thank you and have a great day.